5 toughest wrestlers who fought in mixed martial arts. Listen, I'm not a fan of professional wrestling. I don't get it, right? But obviously, I am aware that a lot of UFC fans and UFC fighters absolutely love it. Look, Colby Covington, he walks out to the WWE theme music of Kurt Angle. Israel Adesanya, he had permission from the WWE to use The Undertaker's theme music and his costume at UFC 267. And Daniel Cormier is the biggest WWE fan in the entire world. Listen, everyone should have a hobby that makes them as what the WWE makes DC. Honestly, earlier this year when DC got to cover WrestleMania, he nearly lost his damn mind. And the last time I saw DC get that overexcited, well, John Jones had just been arrested again. So, more seriously, but with the UFC and the WWE merging into one massive company, I thought I would do a list of the top 5 athletes who started off in pro wrestling, but then switched it up to real competitive fighting in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Now, this isn't a list of people who made the switch in the opposite direction. So there's going to be no Josh Barnett, no Don Fries, and no Ronda Rousey, or any other fighter that then went on to become a professional wrestler. So give me a whoa! Give me a hell yeah!
Give me a hell yeah!
And give me a can you what the count is cooking, because here is my top 5 wrestlers who fought in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Number 5, CM Punk, WWE star turned UFC wannabe, 0-1 with the 1-0 contest in MMA. CM Punk, real name Phil Brooks, was a major star in the WWE about 10 years ago. He was charismatic, he had great walkout music, and he had lots and lots of tattoos. But none of these things do much good in the octagon, as we were all reminded when CM Punk tried to jump from scripted fighting to the UFC. Look, you can roll your eyes now, but there was a huge buzz when Punk was announced that he had signed for the Ultimate Fighting Championship back in December of 2014. Only, unlike the other 4 wrestlers on this list, Punk had absolutely no background in any combat sports whatsoever. Plus, CM Punk was already in his mid-30s and would be learning how to strike, wrestle, and learn submissions from absolute scratch. Now, while Punk impressed everyone with his work ethic at Rufus Sport Academy in Milwaukee, he was injury-prone and struggled to pick up the fundamentals of the arts. I mean, think of how alien it would be going from helping an opponent beat you up to then protecting yourself at all times. He's trying hard, was usually what we were told by his coach, Duke Rufus, as the months rolled on with no sign of CM Punk actually booking his first UFC fight. CM Punk did finally make his debut, a mixed martial arts debut, at UFC 203 in September 2015. And if fans were expecting the trash-talking, anti-authority, badass played in the WWE, well, they were very disappointed. UFC fighter Phil Brooks was keenly aware that he wasn't an elite mixed martial artist, so he wisely didn't engage in any trash talk, and then welterweight Mickey Gall submitted Punk in just 2 minutes. Punk did go on to have one more fight in June 2018 at UFC 225. Mike Jackson beat Punk on points, but the result was overturned when it was discovered that Jackson was actually on marijuana during the fight. Number 4, Ken Shamrock, a pro wrestler turned UFC fighter turned WWE turned UFC star. Keep up with it. 28, 17, and 2 in MMA. Ken Shamrock, he was a high school wrestling star who turned to professional wrestling in his late teens. Now, Uncle Kenny's old jacked-up action movie physique was exactly what Japanese promoters were looking for in an all-American villain. Shamrock wrestled a more realistic style, drawing fans in with takedowns and leg locks rather than spectacular but silly leaps off the top rope. And this realistic style, plus a reputation as someone you didn't want to get into a street fight with, well, that got Ken an invite to take part in the very first Pancrase event in Tokyo in September of 1993. Now, this came 2 months before UFC 1, so Pancrase does have a claim to being the first ever modern MMA event. Problem was, only some of those fights in Pancrase's early days, well, look, they were definitely fake. They were rigged. They were wrestling works, and the pancreas appearance got the attention of the UFC, and Shamrock became perhaps the biggest star of the UFC's OG era. And he beat the likes of Dan Severn and Kimo Leopoldo in between getting the better of Bas Rutten and Maurice Smith in Japan. But when the UFC ran out of money in 1997, Shamrock capitalized on his fame and his pro wrestling background to sign a massive deal with the WWE. Shamrock enjoyed huge success as part of the era where Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and I can't believe I'm reading this stuff out, Scotty 2 Hotty and Dude Love were doing their thing. But after 5 years, Shamrock wanted to compete for real. So he once again returned to mixed martial arts, first in Pride and then in the 2000s. He helped the UFC go mainstream with his bitter feud with Tito Ortiz, the Huntington Beach bad boy. Recently, I partnered with a company called Legacy Precious Metals. Now, I know a lot of people are going through tough times right now, but if you are fortunate enough to where you have a few dollars left over every month to think about investing, then maybe investing in gold and silver through Legacy Precious Metals might be for you. Now, the stock market, if you follow that stuff, it's all over the place. In fact, it's plummeting right now. But precious metals, they've always held their value or even increased. So, of course, that's something that we're all interested in. Does it have to be a lot of money? It can just be a little bit, because it all adds up over time. Now, if you click the link, there is a guide there. It'll tell you all about investing in gold and silver, or you can give them a call and they will answer all of your questions at 866-933-0317. Number 3, Dan Severn, former MMA and WWE star, former UFC super fight champ, 101, 19-7 in MMA. In the old Ultimate Fighter gym in Las Vegas, the UFC had hung these massive canvas posters of the greatest champions in the sport. And look, when I first walked into that gym, there were 10-foot pictures of the legends like Randy Couture holding the UFC heavyweight title, Tito Ortiz with the UFC light heavyweight championship, and Dan the Beast Severn holding a gold title belt in each hand. In his right hand, Severn clutched the UFC 5 tournament championship belt, which he'd earned by defeating judoka Joe Charles, Sambo champ Oleg Taktarov, and Canadian freestyle wrestler Dave Benito, all on the same night. And in his left hand, Dan held the National Pro Wrestling Alliance belt, won from the Big Blue Demon Jr. We could have done a list of 50 pro wrestlers who had an MMA fight or two, but look, listen, no other athlete switched back and forth between combat sports and sports entertainment quite like Dan Severn did. Going into pro wrestling was a given for a natural, talented amateur wrestler like Dan Severn, as plenty of small hall promoters paid to have the credibility of a 2-time Olympic alternate on their card. But then one day in late 1994, Severn got a call from a promoter who wanted him to fight in a cage. Sure, no problem, said Dan. I've done cage matches before. Then the promoter started going over a list of the rules. No biting, but you can choke, you can punch, you can kick, you can elbow. Slowly, Severn realized the guy on the end of the phone was offering him a spot in a real fight tournament, one where virtually anything goes. That promoter was Art Davie, and the event was UFC 4. Now, few in the UFC had an answer for Dan Severn's wrestling skills. He reached the finals of UFC 4, then returned to win UFC 5, the Ultimate 1995 tournament, and then the Super Fight World title, which was kind of a sort of precursor to the modern UFC Heavyweight Championship. For the next 18 years, Dan Severn continued to split his time between pro wrestling and fighting mixed martial arts. Some weekends, the Beast would fight on a Friday night against the likes of, let's say, a Forrest Griffin or a Wes Sims. Then he would drive to the next day and wrestle the Diamond Stud or Damien Demento. Real fight or fake fight, Dan Severn didn't give a shit, as long as the check was real. Number 2, Kazushi Sakuraba, Japanese wrestler turned UFC Pride legend who had a record of 26-17 in MMA. Kazushi Sakuraba is one of Dana White's and Sean Shelby's favorite fighters of all time. Saku, as his legions of fans called him, grew up watching pro wrestling all the time, and he couldn't wait to join his college wrestling team. And look, you can imagine the disappointment when he gets there. He signs up and the coach is like, mate, listen, there are no Scorpion Deathlocks, there's no power bombs, and there is definitely no Canadian destroyer pile drivers in amateur wrestling. But Saku was determined to become a pro wrestler, and after leaving college, he joined the legendary catch wrestling coach Billy Robertson's gym in Tokyo. Robertson was one of the nastiest submission specialists of the 20th century, and he saw something special in Sakuraba. And it wasn't a bright future as a big pro wrestling superstar. Now, despite needing to weigh in with ankle weights on, hidden under his socks to enter the UFC Japan Heavyweight Tournament in 1997, Sakuraba went on to win the four-man competition by becoming the first non-Brazilian to tap out a BJJ black belt in the UFC. In fact, pro wrestling is strong, Sakuraba yelled after he tapped out Marcus Silveira in the finale. While his big wrestling career never really took off the way that he wanted, Sakuraba was just getting started in mixed martial arts. He went on to become a national icon in Pride FC, selling out some of the biggest indoor arenas on earth. His crazy mix of catch wrestling and pro wrestling offense saw him defeat opponents which were way bigger than him, including people like Vitor Belfort, Quinton Rampage Jackson, and the monster Kevin Randleman. But it was his crazy match with Hoist Gracie in May 2000 that cemented Sakuraba's legend. The undefeated Gracie insisted on an absolutely no-hold-barred, no-time limit fight that could only end with a submission. And these insane rules stated that neither the referee nor the ringside doctor could stop the fight, even if there was a knockout. Sakuraba not only agreed to risk his life in this insanity, but dominated the fight and forced Gracie to quit after an inhuman 90 minutes of straight fighting. Just insane. The Pride of Japan continues to do pro wrestling to this day and was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2017. And man, what a legend. Take a bow, Kazushi Sakuraba. Number 1, you guessed it, Brock Lesnar, WWE star turned UFC champ, turned back to the WWE with a record of 5-3. Look, no surprises that the former UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar is number 1 on this list. Brock Lesnar is exactly who you think about when anybody asks about pro wrestlers who then made it to the UFC. He's also who you think about when asked about the worst tattoos that you have ever seen in your entire damn life. Lesnar was an NCAA super heavyweight champion in college and was expected to go to the Olympics. But turns out Brock, he was done wrestling for free and he accepted the WWE's offer to move to their Ohio Development League so he could be trained in the carny arts of wrestling. Few people in history picked up the fundamentals quite as quickly as Lesnar did. And perhaps no other 280-pound giant had ever moved with the same kind of speed and explosiveness. Within 2 years, Lesnar had replaced The Rock as the biggest star in all of wrestling. But after 5 years, and despite making himself enough money to buy a private jet, Brock wanted again to compete for real. This time he was offered a contract to play in the NFL Europe, but didn't want to move to Germany. So he cornered Dana White at a UFC event. Brock was only 1-0 in mixed martial arts, and Dana warned him that the kind of money that he was expecting meant that he would be matched immediately at main event level, and rightly so. And Lesnar answered, I am either this good or I'm not. And you've got to respect that, you really do. And as it turns out, Brock Lesnar lost his UFC debut, controversially, to Frank Mir at UFC 81, but not before proving himself as a force to be reckoned with and selling a shitload of pay-per-views. Lesnar did return and he beat Heath Herring, and then he was given a title fight where he beat Randy the Natural Couture at UFC 91 in November 2008. He actually went on to defend the belt twice, avenging the Mir loss at UFC 100 in July 2009, and then choking out Shane Carwin at UFC 112 a year later. But diverticulitis robbed us of seeing just how good Lesnar may have become at mixed martial arts, because after losses to Cain Velasquez and Alistair Overeem, Brock Lesnar returned to professional wrestling. So there it is. There it is. There's 5 wrestlers. Okay, now look, listen, that was something a little different, but let me know what you thought of this video in the comment section below. And by the way, subscribe, ring the bell. Did I miss anyone? Do you agree with my picks? Are you a pro wrestling and an MMA fan? Well, if so, please explain to me the appeal of this crazy sport of men jumping around in spandex, because I just don't get it. As I say, subscribe, ring the bell. See you soon.